I also have to wonder too, and David Hale made this point. I thought it was a really good one. Like, if the Pac-12, like everybody seeing what happened to Oregon State and Washington State so quickly had an impact on willingness of others in the ACC to kind of get on board with this and be like, all right, well, it does suck if we've got to give some of our media revenue to Florida State or Clemson, but like the alternative is we lose most, if not all of it, and we're stuck doing what Washington State and Oregon State are here. We're Washington State's losing its quarterback and head coach basically on an annual basis, or a high profile coordinator. Like, they can't keep anybody right now. And so it's at least better than that, right? And that has to be something that motivates them, I would think, to get them on board.
Yeah, like I said, if you're Wake Forest, and again, I don't mean to be dunking on some of these schools, but if you're kind of in the lower tier, you bring in less revenue, less eyeballs. You're maybe not invested into football the way that other programs are. It's better to pay a little bit higher of an interest rate on your mortgage than it is to be homeless, right? Like it's there are nothing's great, right? Like it sucks to have to pay a little bit more or not receive as much of a kickback, but it's better than being without a home. And a school like Louisville probably would have been fine either way. Like, they'll probably end up in the Big 12 if this thing craters and collapses. But some of these schools need to realize, and a school like Louisville, like you talk about, we've dunked on the small schools, but a school like Louisville, a school like Georgia Tech that's in Atlanta, a school like Pitt, they have the ability in major media markets to, there's nothing saying like just Florida State and Clemson are going to make more money. It is, you bring in the eyeballs, you bring in the money, right? We saw Miami win 10 games this year and have really good ratings. We saw Georgia Tech have really good ratings. Some of that influenced by playing a standalone game on Friday night of Black Friday and then a standalone game of week 0 Florida State, right? So inflated some, but if those programs continue to win and bring in eyeballs, and especially if they're in ACC stadiums, like Georgia Tech wouldn't have been paid on the game that was in Athens, but if they produce and win, they have every bit of a right to win, to earn this money as anybody else. The Success Initiative is not slanted towards Florida State, other than Florida State being a brand and a program that does typically do pretty well. If Wake Forest goes out and wins the next 6 ACC championships, they're going to make that money. Like, that's just how it works. So, it's fair to an extent as well. And so that's why I think the other members of the conference really, though they probably know they're not going to go out and compete for ACC championships over and over and over again, they have the same opportunity as everybody else.
Yeah, Georgia Tech's a really interesting case because you mentioned, I mean, they feel to me like they could be a sleeping giant based on where they're at and some of the history. Obviously they've won a national championship in my lifetime. I was like 2 years old, but it did technically happen in my lifetime. And so that's one of the things for the other ACC schools here too, is like you buy yourself some cover to just increase your investment in football and up your profile a little bit. I don't know that, anybody outside of the 3 or 4, if you get down to North Carolina, Miami, we have 4 then. Anybody outside of that really has a shot at Big Ten or SEC, but maybe you could try and convince yourself of that if you're like a Georgia Tech, if the next 5-6 years go well enough. We'll see, but just a thought. And I know like David Hale and some others have like raised that point too, and I thought that was kind of an interesting one for the ACC.
Yeah, what I think is interesting, and I don't know if you saw this. I know you were live last night too, but I saw it on replay this morning. Pate brought up a good point, and this is maybe going a little bit off the rails, so hopefully I'm not detouring us too much.
No, you're good.
What if Michigan and Ohio State see this and say like, hey, you see what they're doing down in Charlotte? You see that? Like, why is Rutgers making the same as us? Why is Indiana making the same as us? Why is Purdue making the same as us? We want this. And so and then Georgia and Alabama and LSU and Texas, what if they say that? Right. And so then we get into a situation where, okay, now Michigan's making 100 million, Purdue's making 65, and Florida State and Clemson are like, wait a minute, wait. We just caught up to them. Like, what just happened? And so that seismically shit, and again, people either love or hate Pate, but I thought that was a pretty good point and something I had never thought about through 2 years of now covering this. What if those folks up in Ann Arbor say like, hey, wait. We bring a lot more to the table. And if they're doing it in Charlotte, why are we not doing this up here in Big Ten country?
That's honestly pretty brilliant. And I think it makes all the sense in the world, right? Like the Big 12 was the first conference where like the story leaked out about like private equity back in the summer. And now what just hit that front office sports story came across within the last 48 hours, like the Big 10, who had been kind of publicly against, had kind of thumbed their nose at private equity in college athletics. Now they're getting involved. Tony Petitti is getting involved. So yeah, I'm sure that they would do that. And it also solves the problem. All these people have asked, like why are we letting Vanderbilt hang around here? The Big Ten is the best example of it because they have so much crap at the bottom of that conference. That's the perfect way to take care of it, remedy it. Like, hey, you guys can hang on. You can still get the benefit of being a Big Ten school, but we're going to start taking up some of your money, and they avoid the headache of having to cut out these schools that have been with you for, decades and decades.
Yeah. Yeah. I've often thought, like, where do we get to in college athletics with those, big two conferences, right? Where does that end up getting? Because they do have brands that are less valuable in them. And that's not to dunk on those schools, but a lot of those schools also don't put the resources back into football, right? They collect the checks, and that has been one of Florida State's complaints is, hey, look, we invest so much back into football, and everything we earn and are given, we put back into our athletics to try to compete in as many sports as we can. Florida State's always up there for the Learfield Directors Cup. Now, they're nowhere close to ever winning it, but they're always in the top 20. They're always in the top 10. Or not always, but they're very many years in the top 10. They try to compete in everything. And they're looking around the conference saying, you want to know why this conference stinks? It's because only like 4 or 5 of us here in the conference are actually invested into, we get the money from the ACC, we put it back into our programs. And, I'll stop dunking on people, but there are a lot of teams in this conference, programs in this conference that aren't doing that. And it's the same in other places too. The SEC, more in the SEC do it, but the Big Ten, other places where they're not in that same investment level. And so it is a call to action, I think, if conferences start to do this, because it's, hey, if we're giving you all this money, if you're making $75 million a year off of TV contracts, start to put it back into the program, or you're going to get left behind, and then we're going to pay you less, right? If you're not reinvesting it, not to go super biblical, but it's like, it's the parable of the talents. Hey, I gave you 10 talents, and you went and buried them all and didn't do anything with them. Like, reinvest, right? Like, invest back into your program and at least turn some kind of a profit, make it worthwhile for us to give it to you. So we're jumping all around there with that, but I do think it's an interesting aspect of it.
Well, I think it's a nice jumping off point for one last thing here, which is North Carolina. Like, I mean, you look at the investment that they're pouring in now with hiring Bill Belichick and the contract that they're giving him. And that's always been a place where it's felt like, yeah, there's potential there, but I don't know if they're investing at the level that they would really need to make the football program what it possibly could be. And North Carolina is, I have thought this entire time, like, Florida State's intentions have been pretty clear about what's going on. Clemson, for the most part, pretty clear. But North Carolina, there was just so much dysfunction there and competing factions, and they don't know where they want to go, Big Ten, SEC, or traditionalists that want to stick around. How do you think North Carolina is reacting to the news from yesterday, and like where they're at in all of this?
I think most of the people at UNC, I would exclude Bubba Cunningham, who I think is retiring after this year anyway, after this school year. Or maybe not this year, but the upcoming year. So the start of the 26th season, because obviously the calendar runs through June. I think most people at North Carolina actually are a little bit more on board with what Florida State and Clemson are doing. They have some legal challenges, some political challenges because of their board of governors in the state system. It seems like NC State might get the best free ride golden ticket of all time here when all this stuff goes down. But because of that, because Bubba Cunningham is very much so an ACC loyalist, you have some internal strife with how that's been pursued. Also, you've got Florida State and Clemson kind of fighting these battles for you. So why come out and jump into the ring? But North Carolina is believed to be the third team that was against expansion. I think North Carolina wants to, from a program perspective, wants to get out just as badly, maybe close to as badly as Florida State and Clemson. I think they are as desired, if not more. I can even admit that as a Florida State fan. I think they are as desired, if not more, by both conferences. And so, yeah, I think that they're an interesting cog in all of this. I think their reaction to this is probably the same as Florida State and Clemson's. Probably we kind of expected this, but it doesn't change their desire. I think UNC very much wants to get out. They've got more history in the ACC. They have more loyalists there that make it maybe a little bit more difficult. They have the political factors I mentioned, but in their heart of hearts, they know we need to get out because they want to survive. They want to compete at the highest level, not just in basketball, but in football as well. You can even see with some of the way that they've allocated resources. They are allocating less now than ever to basketball and more now to football than ever. I think they understand the writing's on the wall. ACC hoops is pretty down this year outside of Duke, and it was pretty down last year too. I think I think the ACC realizes, and some of its members, North Carolina included, realize like we got to invest into football. And I think part of that is going to be them leaving at or around the time that the other two leave as well.
Yeah. Hard to see FSU and Clemson getting out of there without North Carolina at the same time.
Yeah.
All right, TJ, appreciate it. As I said, everybody go follow the channels. If you're a Florida State fan, Double Fries, No Slaw, College Football Addiction for everybody in college football. Appreciate the time, man.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, buddy.